Let's take this right from the top, get into the details. Somebody swallowing methylene blue into the body. Talk about the impact on the mitochondria and the details there.
Okay, so let's do a quick biochemistry lesson for everybody, just to get us on the same page. And I'm not going to get crazy here. My daughter is doing her biology class now. She's in 9th grade, and she just finished her her last unit on oxidative phosphorylation, which is the capacity for our mitochondria to make energy from oxygen. Okay, she did it in plants. She did it in animals. I didn't remember anything about plants, actually. I was learning it with her again with chloroplasts and all these other kinds of things that I had totally forgotten about. But for our purposes, let's talk about these mitochondria, right? So mitochondria are the engines of our cells. They're the parts of our cell that help us make energy. As I was mentioning earlier, we make about 150 pounds of ATP, our energy currency, every single day. And we have some cells in our body that have a huge amount of energy demand, and we have other cells in our body that don't have as much and don't need as much mitochondria per cell. So we have some cells in our body that have thousands of mitochondria per cell, and we have some cells in our body that have very few mitochondria because they don't require as much energy. So the cells that have the most mitochondria per cell are eggs and sperm. Right behind our reproductive organs, which, again, fertility rates, they're not going up, right? They're going down. And this is kind of like the lowest common denominator, which is mitochondrial dysfunction. Just after the eggs and sperm, we have our brain. Then our heart, our liver, our musculoskeletal tissue, our kidneys. So we have a lot of areas in our body that require a lot of energy on a regular basis. And our brain is typically where most of us are going to feel this. We have brain fog, concentration problems, mental health disorders, attention problems, right? Mood issues. These are all at its base related to mitochondrial dysfunction. So the question becomes, well, what's causing all this mitochondrial dysfunction, right? 94% of US adults, as I mentioned earlier, have some element of this. Well, a lot of things. A couple of things to mention here that are really, really important. The first one is insulin resistance. Because if you have high blood sugars all the time, what's happening that's causing a lot of inflammation in the system. And this includes the mitochondria, because what the mitochondria uses to make energy is glucose or fat, which I'll talk about in a minute. And as a result of that, if you have a lot of glucose going to the mitochondria, you're making a lot more energy. If you're making a lot more energy, you're also making a lot more waste. You have to have a lot more antioxidants around to combat that. And if you have a lot of that going on for a long period of time, you deplete your antioxidants and you cause a lot of more stress in the system. So insulin resistance is actually one of the major causes. The other major cause of mitochondrial dysfunction is what I call the sympathetic spiral of doom. It sounds quite ominous, but this is what I mean is that your body's always in fight or flight. Your body's always in a hyper vigilant place. Most people are living here more of the time than they realize. The other aspect of our nervous system is called our parasympathetic nervous system. And compared to our sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight or flight, we are supposed to be in parasympathetic more than we are in general. But being in sympathetic causes a lot of hormones like cortisol to be released, neurotransmitters like epinephrine and norepinephrine that put a lot of stress on the mitochondria over time and cause mitochondrial dysfunction. You also have toxins in the environment that cause mitochondrial dysfunction directly, infections, medications. These are all causing significant mitochondrial stress. And as a result of that, you're not making energy effectively. So with all that in mind, what's actually happening in the mitochondria is that the mitochondria are taking energy, or taking actually electrons from your food, mostly carbohydrates and fats. And those electrons are being donated or transferred into the part of the mitochondria called the electron transport chain. The carriers of these electrons are things like NAD and FAD. F as in Frank. Many people have heard of taking NAD supplements, right? NAD is this really important carrier of electrons from our food to bring it into the mitochondria to help us make energy. Okay, and how is this all working, right? So the electrons go to the mitochondria, the part of the mitochondria called the electron transport chain. Electron transport chain has 4 different proteins, aptly named 1, 2, 3, and 4, complex 1, 2, 3, and 4. Electrons flow through these protein complexes, creating a gradient of protons, a gradient basically that allows you to, as a result of this gradient, to go first you're going against the gradient to make it, and then you're allowing some of these protons to go through the gradient back, and that's what actually makes ATP. So short story, electrons flow through, they create a gradient, and then we release this gradient, and while we release this gradient, we're making ATP. We make ATP, we make water, we make carbon dioxide, and we also make those free radicals, the reactive oxygen species, because not all those electrons make it all the way through. Sometimes actually they leak across those proteins and cause the reactive oxygen species. And then oxygen's required because it's the final electron acceptor. So as those electrons are going through the chain, they need a place to go at the end. And at the end, they get picked up by oxygen, and that's how we make water in our cells, okay? And this is the structured water that everybody cares about. This is the deuterium-depleted water that people talk about all the time, right? And so this is a very important type of water for how our cells maintain electron gradients and proton flows and everything like that, okay? So that is your 9th grade chemistry lesson on how to think of what mitochondria are. So as we're now understanding mitochondria, they have this electron flow, they're making energy. They have this, the other side of it, which is the reactive oxygen species, they're making water and carbon dioxide. And that's where the antioxidants come in to help neutralize that reactive oxygen species, okay? Now, the problem, as I said, 94% of US adults have some element of mitochondrial dysfunction. So what does that mean? It means that either you can't make energy effectively, those electrons aren't flowing effectively and causing energy to be produced effectively, or you can't neutralize the stress of making energy effectively. So you've made energy, but now you have those reactive oxygen species that are hanging around, and you don't have enough antioxidants to be able to neutralize that, okay? Just to give people like more of a basis of this in a real world sense, a lot of people hear about metabolic health these days, right? And what I like to describe here is that metabolic health is mitochondrial health, okay? And what metabolic health really means, if you're metabolically healthy, it means that you can make energy effectively from the food that you eat, and you can then neutralize the stress of making energy in your mitochondria effectively. Just what I said about mitochondrial function is the equivalent of metabolic dysfunction. So you'll find out there people talking about metabolic health all the time. Well, really what they're talking about in essence is mitochondrial health. It's the same thing. Now you have all these things that are stressing the mitochondria, causing challenges. Now let's talk about methylene blue. Methylene blue, we very well know, concentrates in the mitochondria. As I mentioned earlier in our conversation, we found this out because they were looking at cells under a microscope. They put methylene blue in the cell, and suddenly it was concentrating in this really cool part of the cell called the mitochondria. What is it doing there? It has the capacity to both enhance energy production and also be directly and indirectly an antioxidant. And there's no other compounds out there that really do this in the same capacity. Maybe hydrogen itself, taken like orally or inhaled, can have a similar effect. And I can talk about that if you have interest. But in essence, methylene blue is one of the few compounds on the planet that we're aware of that what's called redox cycles, has the capacity to help you both make more energy and detoxify at the same time. If you have mitochondrial dysfunction, the most common places to have this dysfunction are either on complex 1 or complex 2. And complex 1 and complex 2 are the ones of the complexes that are taking the electrons from your food and bringing them to the electron transport chain so that you can make energy. So if you don't have working complex 1 and complex 2, you're not going to make energy effectively. You're not going to feel good. All those symptoms I mentioned, infertility, brain fog, concentration issues, cardiac issues, detoxification issues, muscle issues, pain, inflammation, these are mitochondrial issues, when it comes down to it. And so that's what you're going to feel if you're not making energy effectively. And so what methylene blue can do is it actually can compensate by bypassing some of those dysfunctional complexes and allowing electrons to get further down the chain to be able to help you make energy. It also can recycle and renew parts of those protein complexes and actually can help recycle and renew your NAD supply as well. So you don't have to take NAD supplements. You can just have some methylene blue. And there's, a controversy about NAD supplements themselves anyway, as you likely know, Jesse. And so for me, that's one of the big components of it, right? Is because so many of us have such energy production capacity issues, and methylene blue can come in there and compensate for that. In addition, as I mentioned, the redox side is that it can help with the detoxification side too. So you're bypassing complexes that aren't working very well. You're renewing the complexes over time. You're making them more optimized. And at the same time, while you're doing that and making more energy, you're also helping with the detoxification side too. So you're not causing a lot of stress on the system. But low doses are key here. If you start giving high doses, then you're making that hydrogen peroxide again and causing more stress on the system that the mitochondria may not be able to tolerate. That's why these lower doses are so important, and titrating the dose over time, starting off at 4 milligrams, staying there for 3 or 5 days and saying, how do I feel? Am I feeling a little bit better? Am I not? Like, then if you're feeling great, then you stay there. But if you're not feeling like you have an effect yet, then increase it. Go additional 4 milligrams, see how you feel. Then start there or stay there for about 3 to 5 days. It's important to realize, as a corollary to this, that methylene blue is not one of those things that builds up in your system over time and starts working. It's not like you take it for like 30 days and see how it feels. No, if it doesn't work after about 3 to 5 days, you don't feel like it's having an effect, then you go up on the dose. And you go up on the dose again. Then when you find the dose that seems to be working for you, you can be like, well, should I try a little bit more? And then you can try it. Typically, if you do that, you won't see any additional major return on your investment there. And you'll just kind of go back to the dosing that you were at before. And that's how I typically dose it with my patients. I started off at low doses and increase the dose over time. Don't wait too long. If it's 3 or 5 days and no major effect, keep going up on the dose until you find a benefit there. And that really does mitigate the potential for you causing too much stress on the system and having where you're getting symptomatic like detox kinds of symptoms or headaches and things like that. But it does still happen for sure, but much less often if you start at the lower doses and increase it from there.
Okay, so very high level here. 94% have challenges with their mitochondria.
Yep.
Methylene blue can come in and help facilitate. What about that 6% that don't? Are there certain benefits for those people?
I had a friend of mine recently, actually I was recording with him on a podcast, and he said, Scott, what you really mean is that 100% of people have mitochondrial stress, but only 6% of those people have enough resilience to be able to neutralize and to be able to be optimized with that kind of mitochondrial stress. And I said, that's probably a better way to think about it, but even those 6% are going to have mitochondrial stress that's not going to be easy for them to tolerate, for periods of time as well. Think about like severe stress at work, maybe being an example, but more likely things like travel or sickness or a severe stress that's out of the norm for them, right? So if you're healthy and you're mitochondrial optimized, it's unlikely you need to take methylene blue on a regular basis. You can take it periodically when you have more mitochondrial stress. And this is what I do with my patients. If they're pretty well optimized, I'm giving them methylene blue when they're traveling, when they're super stressed at work, when somebody's sick at the house, when they're doing significant amounts of endurance racing or really challenging themselves physically, because methylene blue has this capacity to also work like oxygen to some degree, where it can actually maintain your capacity with aerobic respiration for longer when you have methylene blue on board and reach your lactate threshold later as a result of having methylene blue on board. So you actually can do more work from an oxidative phosphorylation perspective, meaning you can make energy from oxygen for longer if you have methylene blue on board, because it can work just like oxygen. And so this also correlates to not only endurance racing, but also travel, right? If you're on an airplane and you're pressurized to 8,000 feet above sea level, which is what you are on a regular airplane, you're hypoxic, you're low oxygen on that airplane. You've went from, on average at sea level, it's about 21% oxygen in the air. At 8,000 feet, you're really about 17 or 16% oxygen in the air that you're breathing. And that's immediately a hypoxic stress, where your body's like, oh crap, now I don't have enough oxygen around. Those electrons start backing up, you get more inflammation. Methylene blue comes in and you can actually rescue that capacity for longer and decrease inflammation and actually neutralize some of that reactive oxygen stress that's happening. So you have, again, somebody might be pretty well optimized, but they're still going to feel better if they had some additional support while they were traveling or while they were doing endurance racing and things like that. So in essence, the more mitochondrial support you need, the more often you're going to need to take methylene blue, especially in the beginning. And hopefully over time, you can decrease the amount that you need by optimizing your health in various ways. Optimizing vitamins, minerals, nutrients, and cofactors, your diet, your lifestyle, your stress, all those things, right? But if you're pretty well optimized to starting off with, then you use it periodically. Use it as needed when you have, higher stress-related events where you're going to be under more stress for a period of time, where having methylene blue on board could be certainly, significantly helpful.
When somebody's taking methylene blue, Obviously, it's really targeting the mitochondria as you're getting into here. How much of that benefit is temporary as it's in our system and on board versus actually fixing mitochondria, if any?
So what I usually tell my patients is that there is some evidence that methylene blue does have some capacity to renew and to increase the density of certain complexes of the mitochondria, so that even if you stop the methylene blue, that benefit should likely continue. But the majority of what I emphasize to patients is that this is not, for the most part, for most people, a long-term solution to support mitochondrial function as the only thing that you want to do. Because what happens if I give somebody methylene blue, oftentimes, and they're doing nothing else different to optimize their health, they stop the methylene blue and their symptoms are going to come back mostly. Okay. And so I don't think about it as a fix-it pill that you take it and then you're done after you take it. I think of it as something that's supporting you, because life is freaking stressful. Life is going every which way for many people. We are busy, we're under bad lighting, we have bad food, we travel, we have stressful relationships with our spouses, with our kids, with our parents, like there's all these things are happening at all times. We're not living in a world where we're hanging out in parasympathetic mode most of the time, right? So that's why I think methylene blue can be fantastic, because it has this capacity to support you. But, and this is the big but, right? It's like, I get the question, which is kind of similar to your question, is can you become dependent on methylene blue, right? And the answer is that you can only become dependent on it if you're not doing anything else to optimize your health, right? In the sense that if you stop it, you're not doing anything else to support your health, your symptoms are going to come back. No doubt about it. You know what I mean? So there is some evidence that can enhance and optimize, especially complex 4 on the mitochondria. But clinically, what I've seen is that if people stop methylene blue and they haven't been doing anything else to support their system, their symptoms are likely going to come back over time. So my framework here is that we're using methylene blue in the capacity to help you right now while you're on the longer path of optimizing your health. And over time, yes, everybody's going to have all the things that I just mentioned in their life with stress and life, right? And so it's going to be periodically helpful to take your methylene blue so that you can support yourself through those moments and days or weeks, whatever it might be. But you shouldn't need it every day. And if you do, that's probably because you're not doing some of the other work that really could be helpful long-term. Like, why are you stressed all the time? Do you need to get out of a toxic relationship and get divorced? Do you need to sleep in a different bedroom than your spouse because they're snoring? Do you need to get out of a bad job? Do you need to work on your own stress response and figure out, well, maybe I need to figure out how to get into parasympathetic mode? I wouldn't recommend telling anybody to calm down, because that doesn't typically work, by the way, especially a spouse or a partner. Please don't tell your spouse or partner to calm down. It never works. Believe me, I'm sure many of you have tried, and as have I. It doesn't work, right? So you want to have these long-term strategies for patients. And I think about this a lot, because I think about this from the capacity of the energy production side and the detoxification side, and what's all happening on both sides of this all the time for my patients, and how I can work on that to support them. How can I support mitochondrial dysfunction so that their insulin resistance is better, so that their stress is better, so they're not taking medications that are affecting their mitochondria, so that they're not exposed to toxins or whatever it might be, right? So you have to be thinking about all those things. Those are the inputs, right? You have to be thinking about also how you can support detoxification, because that's also very important too. But a big thing here, Jesse, is that a question that I get a lot is, well, why can't I just take antioxidants? Isn't that going to be helpful? And I go, yeah, antioxidants can be helpful to support that antioxidant capacity that we've been describing. But what if you still can't make energy effectively? You're still going to feel like crap. Yes, you've taken your glutathione and your binders. A great example of this is I was talking to a practitioner a couple months ago now, and she's like, well, I'm on this detox protocol myself. She was on a detox protocol. I've been taking my binders. I've been taking my antioxidants. I've been doing the sauna, and I just felt wasted, just washed out, and because I had all this toxicity and I've been working on it. But as soon as I started adding methylene blue into my protocol, I didn't feel washed out at all. And she asked me why. And there's a very obvious reason. I was kind of foreshadowing it here, which is that she still had energy production capacity enhancing because she had methylene blue on board. So even if she was getting detoxification and she was getting that part of that side, she wasn't getting enough energy support. And that's why she was feeling so tired afterwards. But as soon as she started adding methylene blue, what happened? She started feeling much better after getting out of her sauna. She felt energized after she got out of her sauna, because suddenly she had more energy and she had the garbage collection was all good, right? One of the things a great analogy that I like for garbage collection for people, this is your reactive oxygen species, this is your oxidative stress, this is your lack of antioxidant capacity, all those things. Think about a city where garbage collection stops. The garbage just starts piling up and piling up and piling up and then starts smelling. And then, there's animals and there's everything. Like that's what's happening in your cells if you don't have enough antioxidant capacity. But you also need to have the energy producing capacity as well to actually see the benefit over the long term, right? So if you have garbage trucks, but they don't have electricity, like what's the difference afterwards, right? So like there's the analogy I'm still working on, but you get my point.
Earlier, you talked about incorporating red light with methylene blue. Now that we understand the physiology and what's happening under the hood, talk about what's happening there.
Yeah.
And how somebody can go about using that to their benefit.
So red light therapy is typically a nanometer wavelength around 680 or so, 680 nanometers. So it's red in color. And there's been some good studies looking at combining red light with methylene blue. You can use low doses of methylene blue with low intensity red light to enhance complex 4 specifically in the mitochondria. So this is enhancing the capacity to donate electrons and photonic energy directly to complex 4. Methylene blue donates electrons. Red light donates photonic energy to complex 4. And as a result of that, enhances your capacity to make ATP. So what you'll find is if you use your methylene blue, you take it, and then you go in front of your red light panel 30 minutes, an hour later, depending on how you took your methylene blue, or you go out in the sunlight. Sunlight has red light as well. You're going to feel a synergistic capacity go up. Your energy is going to go up. Your focus is going to go up. You're going to feel better. Your mind is going to feel more clear. And this has been shown countless times anecdotally around the world. And there was also, with people taking it, and there's also a study looking at this in animals, combining methylene blue with red light at these levels. And at higher doses of methylene blue, the milligram per kilogram dosage that I talked about for antimicrobial dosing, milligram to milligram and a half or so, combining it with more high intensity red light lasers, you get a significant anti-infective capacity. Because what methylene blue does here is it becomes a photosensitizer. So it actually increases the production of these reactive oxygen species like hydrogen peroxide, hydroxyl radicals, oxygen, singlet oxygen as well, that also are fantastically antimicrobial and anti-cancer as well. So there are some studies that have looked at methylene blue combining it with what they call photodynamic therapy. So when you have high intensity lasers, it doesn't become red light. It changes its name, even though it's the same wavelength, to being what's called photodynamic therapy. So in this case, methylene blue becomes a photosensitizer, not photosynthesizer, going back to my daughter's science class, photosensitizer. And so that it sensitizes the tumor, for example, in this case, to the combination of methylene blue with the high intensity laser. So it's super cool. And it's being used in this way. There's a couple of clinics outside the country that are using intratumoral lasers like actually putting a laser inside a tumor itself, a high intensity red light, combining it with methylene blue together and seeing some fantastic benefits. So mostly what I use clinically is the lower doses, right? The lower doses of methylene blue, around 4 to 25 milligrams. Combining that with red light is a fantastic way to support and enhance your mitochondrial capacity to make energy. And again, the cool thing is that you're not creating more waste because the methylene blue works as an antioxidant directly as well.
Any other nuanced subjects related to methylene blue that we should get into?
Yes, thank you for reminding me. One I did want to mention was the question of whether you should take methylene blue if you have healthy mitochondria, because the mitochondria are going to be detrimentally affected by the methylene blue if you have healthy mitochondria. In fact, there was another guy, a PhD, on a podcast recently using an analogy of like a crazy taxi driver through the city and how methylene blue would do electron flow through various places and make things worse if you had normal mitochondria. Okay. First of all, again, 94% of US adults have some element of mitochondrial dysfunction. So it's very unlikely, right? Only 6% people are metabolically healthy, that you have optimized mitochondria to start off with. It's just the name of the game. Okay. So taking that off the table, let's say you're in that 6% of people that have optimized mitochondria. Will methylene blue make your mitochondria function worse? The answer is that we have no clinical evidence that this is the case. We only have some animal studies looking at very high doses of methylene blue, those doses that I mentioned before, 4 or 5 milligrams per kilogram. So huge amounts. That's the equivalent in humans. That's not the amount in animals. That's the equivalent of the dosing that they used that would be in humans. This is in animal models, where it showed that if they had normal mitochondria, what they did is they did a study on animals and they gave them a stroke, okay? And when they did is that they looked at the mitochondrial function, they looked at the outcome of this animal that had a stroke, okay? The animal that had a stroke had a significant benefit using methylene blue at these high doses, actually, with stroke mitigation. So they had less stroke area, they had better perfusion, this had better outcomes from the stroke. But in the normal area of the brain, where there wasn't a stroke, there was evidence of mitochondrial dysfunction, okay? And so they transpose this data and say, well, if you have normal mitochondria, you shouldn't take methylene blue because it's going to mess up your mitochondria. I'm like, no, look at the study, man. Like, look what they did. They're using high doses, and that's what they found. And then clinically, I've been using methylene blue for the last 6 years now. I have not seen this. I use it in optimized people all the time. Not all the time, every day they're taking it, but they're taking it when they need it, when they have more mitochondrial stress, when they're traveling, when they're doing endurance work, when they have high intensity cognitive load. They do better using methylene blue. They don't use it all the time, but they use it as needed. And they use it for aerobic training. They use it for anaerobic training. I have a friend of mine that uses it and notices that his capacity to recover is better at a higher heart rate than it was before, because he actually can maintain energy production at a higher capacity for longer, and then he can recover without having to go down as far from a heart rate perspective. And he notices this with his Oura rings and with his Whoops and all the things that he tracks with. So we know clinically that this is not relevant information. Now, if you're taking super high doses of methylene blue, yes, this is a different story. We're talking about doses at 4, 8, 16, 25 milligrams. Those are the doses I'm talking about. I'm not talking about like ridiculous dosing of methylene blue. So this is where it's so important, signal from the noise, as we talked about in the beginning, right? To be able to change the conversation to what's the signal here. The signal is what's most important, not the noise, okay? Yes, there's lots of researchers that will tell you that methylene blue is not good for these reasons that we just described before, but they're not working with it clinically. They're not seeing what we're seeing on a regular basis and understanding, okay, this is what's actually happening with patients. This is what actually we can actually observe, not some theoretical researcher saying that this is what's going to happen if you take something in a certain way. So I'm a big fan of taking that noise. Let's just calm it down a little, everybody, and let's focus on that signal and how beneficial this particular compound can be under the right circumstances.
Somebody that's tuned in to this point, they've never tried methylene blue. They're on the fence. They're intrigued. What would you say to them?
I would say that it's one of those things where when you start taking it, you will realize that you probably needed it all along. And that's because most of us have mitochondrial dysfunction, right? And once you start feeling better, you'll feel more energy, more focus, more clarity. Your brain fog will be better. You'll feel like your attention is improved and your sustainability. Then you might be going, well, I didn't know I could do this. What else can I do to optimize my health to get my brain and my body feeling this way on a regular basis without taking this all the time? So think about it as like a gateway into understanding how well your cells are working right now. If you take it and you find a dose that works fantastically well for you, that's fantastic. And it also means that you have a lot more you can actually have in capacity that would not require methylene blue over the long term if you optimize your health, if you optimize your foundational biomarkers, if you look at things from a foundational perspective. And that's what I do in clinical practice. I give people the overarching vision here, which is I have a practice that's called health optimization medicine. It's focused on foundational health biomarkers. We optimize health and we look at optimizing people to an age range between 21 and 30 years of age. That's when we're most optimized, typically. Hormones, nutrients, gut, neurotransmitters, everything to that age range. But that takes time. It's not going to happen overnight. 6 months, year, sometimes longer. It took you 50 years to get to how you feel. It's going to take you some time, right? But what are the things along the way that can give you energy, give you focus? Methylene blue is just one of those major levers for my patients. And that's what I would say to somebody asking is like, well, I think I'm doing all right. Maybe I don't know if I need methylene blue, like my energy's pretty good. Or maybe like, well, I get a little more energy. Like I feel like my afternoons aren't as good as they used to be. Like sometimes I yell at my kids and I don't know why, or sometimes I don't recover as well from the gym as I used to, or I get on an airplane, it takes me a couple days to recover. It used to be like the day after. I mean, just, down the line. I'm drinking 2 cups of coffee instead of 1, or I'm on my 3rd and I'm crashing. Like I just have more brain fog than I used to. Like these aren't things that pop up like acutely. They're happening and slowly building over time. It's the slow burn. But if any of that sounds like it resonates to you, then taking methylene blue could be like this window to be like, oh, now I realize, yes, there is more capacity that I have, and let's get on it. Let's see what else I can do to optimize that capacity. Or if you're an athlete and your endurance, or you're doing really hard stuff and you want more capacity, you want to get that extra edge, then methylene blue can help you potentially do that too. You can maintain your heart rate up for longer. You can see your recovery get better because you've had it on board with mitochondrial support. And so all across the spectrum, I use it. And that's why I think it's something that, as long as you're getting good quality methylene blue and you're not taking liquids that from an Amazon seller that says it's from the United States, but it'll get 3 weeks of time to get through customs when you first purchase it. This is something that I've heard from a couple of people. Get good quality stuff. That's what we make at our company at Transcriptions. We really do go to the ends of the earth to check quality. And that's going to be the biggest thing I would talk about, in addition to think about taking it, is get good stuff. If you're not getting good stuff, you might be getting contamination with heavy metals. You might be getting less than you think you are. You might be making a huge mess in the process. And so, we really care about that. We have manufacturers of the methylene blue that we've been using for a long time, but the certificates of analysis that we get from those companies, we test again with another independent lab before we use them. It's very rare to have companies do that. But if they don't, you just don't know what you're getting. And this is not just with methylene blue, this is with other companies and other products as well. I mean, there was the recent creatine gummy scandal that came out. No creatine in the gummies, everybody, right? Because manufacturers can say whatever they want on some level, and then it's up to the companies themselves to do the extra work. And that's what we've done at our company.
Since you made it to the end of this clip, I know you're going to love the full episode. Click here to watch. I'll see you over there.
94% of US adults have mitochondrial dysfunction. I see this on an everyday basis in my clinical practice, where we start low doses of methylene blue and see fantastic benefit across the board, anything from pain, inflammation.